In April of 1981, in a crowded hall in San Francisco, a 42-year-old book publisher named Adam Osborne walked up to a table, put his hand through a molded plastic handle, and lifted the Osborne 1 computer off the floor. It weighed 24.5 pounds. The keyboard folded up over the screen and latched shut like the lid of a lunchbox, and when it was closed, the whole thing was a beige suitcase with a company name on the side. He set it down on the table. That was the demonstration. There was nothing else to show, and there did not need to be, because until that afternoon, a computer was a thing you drove a van to collect. Inside 2 years, this machine would be leaving the factory at 10,000 units a month, and the company would be booking $73 million a year. Inside 2 years after that, the company would be gone. Everyone in the technology business can tell you why. There is even a law named after it, the Osborne Effect. And the law is mostly wrong. We take apart the companies that shaped the electronic world down to the last chip and the engineer who soldered it in. If that is your kind of history, subscribe and hit the like button. The rise of Osborne took 24 months, and what actually killed it is a story 4 layers deep, and only one of them is famous. Adam Osborne was born in Bangkok in March of 1939, and he was raised in the south of India. His father, Arthur Osborne, was a British writer who had become a devotee of the Hindu sage Ramana Maharshi, and Adam spent his childhood around the ashram at Tiruvannamalai. He was 11 when the family sent him to school in England. He read chemical engineering at Birmingham, took a doctorate at the University of Delaware in 1968, and went to work for Shell Oil in Northern California. He was a bad fit for an oil company and a very good writer. Asked to produce a manual, he discovered that almost every technical document in the young microprocessor business was unreadable, and that the people who understood the machines were incapable of explaining them to anyone who did not. In 1972, he founded a publishing house, Osborne and Associates, to fix that. His own book, An Introduction to Microcomputers, sold more than 300,000 copies. He wrote a column, he went to the trade shows, and he acquired a reputation as the loudest critic in an industry of enthusiasts. In 1979, he sold the publisher to McGraw-Hill, and for the first time in his life, he had capital. He also had an argument, and he had been making it in print for years. Computers, he said, should be adequate, rather than excellent. Most of what a machine could do went unused by the person who bought it, and every unused capability was money taken out of a customer's pocket for nothing. The right question was not how good a computer could be, it was how little a computer could be and still earn its keep. That is a strange position for a man who is about to start selling computers, and it explains everything that followed, including the ending. The rest of the industry was competing to be better. Osborne intended to compete on being sufficient. He was selling the floor rather than the ceiling. For the engineering, he went to Lee Felsenstein, who had come out of the Homebrew Computer Club in Menlo Park and had already designed one commercially successful machine. Osborne supplied the argument, the relationships, and the noise. Felsenstein supplied a design shaped entirely by cost and size, instead of performance and beauty. The company was incorporated in Hayward, California in January of 1981, and it had started life under a different name. The machine they built was called the Osborne 1, and it cost $1,795. It ran a Zilog Z80 at 4 MHz with 64 kilobytes of memory under an operating system called CP/M. The screen was 5 inches measured across the diagonal, smaller than a paperback, and it showed 52 columns of text, where the desk machines of the day showed 80. 2 floppy drives sat either side of the glass, each holding about 90 kilobytes. There was no battery, it ran off a wall socket, and you carried it between the sockets. Every one of those numbers is a compromise, and the compromises were the product. 90 kilobytes is around 40 pages of text. A small firm's entire accounts lived on 2 disks the size of a beer mat, swapped in and out as the software asked for them. And if you dropped one in a car park, you had lost a quarter's invoicing. The drives were loud, and they ground audibly when they sought, so anyone in the room knew exactly when the machine was reading. The right-hand end of a standard spreadsheet fell off the edge of the screen, and the operator scrolled sideways to read his own numbers. None of that mattered in 1981 because the alternative was a computer that owned a desk and a room to put the desk in. This one went in a closet at night. It came to a client meeting without a van. Osborne's advertising ran a photograph of the machine sliding under an aircraft seat, and that picture did an enormous amount of work. It was not really a promise about aeroplanes. It was a promise that the thing on your desk had stopped being furniture. But the real invention was not the machine, and Osborne knew it. It was what came in the box with it. The Osborne shipped with its software already on the diskettes. WordStar, created by Seymour Rubinstein's MicroPro, for writing with its mail merge companion. SuperCalc for spreadsheets, 2 versions of the BASIC programming language, including Microsoft BASIC. 5 items in all by the company's own advertising, and nothing to install, nothing to order, and nothing to reconcile. Understand what that replaced. In 1981, you bought a computer, and then you bought each program separately, and then you spent days making them work together, and sometimes they did not work together at all, and you were left holding a telephone to a support desk that might not exist. The bundle carried a retail value of about $1,530 against a machine that cost $1,795. Not more than the computer, whatever the legend says, but close enough that the arithmetic stopped a buyer in the aisle. Osborne got it partly by paying in stock instead of cash. MicroPro, which made WordStar, took 75,000 shares in his company, which tied its fortune directly to his hardware. For a 5-person firm that had never owned a computer, this was the only offer on the shelf that made sense. 1 purchase, 1 carton, and by that afternoon, somebody was typing an invoice. No consultant. No second check for $1,000 of software after the first $2,000 had already gone. WordStar is the part people still talk about. There was no mouse and there were no menus as we understand them. You moved the cursor with a diamond of keys under your left hand. Control and E for up, S for left, D for right, X for down. And once your fingers had it, you never looked at them again. Printing meant a daisy wheel hammering out 1 character at a time, loud enough that offices bought padded hoods to put over the printers. A secretary who learned that Diamond on an Osborne could sit down at any machine in the country running the same program and start work without being taught anything. The market answered immediately. Shipping began in July of 1981, and in the 8 months that followed, the company moved 11,000 machines. Dealers loved it because it stood out on a shelf where everything else was a beige box. Buyers loved it because they could walk out of the shop carrying an entire office. At its height, the factory in Hayward was turning out around 10,000 machines a month, an extraordinary rate for the period, and across a production run of barely 2 years, the Osborne sold well over 100,000 units. Revenue for the year to February 1983 reached roughly $73 million. Which for a company that had shipped absolutely nothing 24 months earlier, was close to the fastest start the American computer industry had ever seen. Growth like that makes its own problems. Manufacturing scaled faster than the money did, inventory ran ahead of cash, and the company spent its entire life chasing its own success. The plant that could not keep up with demand is the same plant that would shortly be standing almost empty. And then, over about 18 months, 4 separate things went wrong at once. The first arrived in August of 1981, 4 months after the Osborne itself. The IBM personal computer, developed under Don Estridge, the engineer IBM had tasked with building it, was a desk machine. So it did not compete directly with a portable, but it did something worse than compete. It set the standard. Corporate buyers who had never heard of Adam Osborne suddenly had a safe choice from a supplier they already trusted. Underneath that sat the deeper problem. IBM's machine ran MS-DOS, the operating system Microsoft had licensed to them without exclusivity, so anyone could build a compatible machine and run the same software. Microsoft had not given IBM an exclusive license, so a network effect formed around that platform which CPM could not match. The Osborne ran CPM, and CPM was the standard of the era that was ending. The second arrived in 1982, and it was aimed directly at them. The K-Pro 2 came out of Non-Linear Systems, Andy K's company, the same K who had built his fortune on the digital voltmeter, and it put a 9-inch screen into a folded steel case that a buyer picked up and instantly read as heavy-duty. Nearly twice the glass, no squinting, and a spreadsheet that fitted across the display without scrolling, which removed at a stroke the one thing every Osborne owner complained about: same Z80, same CPM, so it ran the same programs, and it launched at the same $1,795. The 5-inch screen that had been perfectly acceptable when it was the only portable on Earth was now the reason to buy the other one. The third is the famous one. In the spring of 1983, before its successors were ready, the company talked about them in public. The machine at the center of it was the Osborne Executive, a 7-inch screen instead of 5 80 columns instead of 52, more storage, and a price of $2,495. It was precisely what every complaint about the first machine had been asking for. And that is the problem. A customer standing in a shop with $1,800, who has just been told that the fixed version is coming, has been handed an excellent reason to keep the money in his pocket for a few months. Nothing was finished. No firm ship date existed. That moment is what the technology industry has called the Osborne Effect ever since. Announce your next product too early, and you will kill the one you are still selling. It is quoted in board meetings to this day. Now here is where honest history has to hold two readings at once. The first reading is not a fiction. The announcement did real damage. Dealers pulled back, and it is worth being concrete about why, because the whole ending turns on it. A computer shop in 1982 was a small business with a shop front and a stockroom, and it bought its inventory outright with its own money. Every unit on that shelf was capital the owner had already spent. A dealer who believed next quarter's machine would be better did not politely wait. He stopped ordering this quarter's because he could not afford a stockroom full of something he would shortly have to discount. A channel that amplifies demand on the way up amplifies caution on the way down through the very same mechanism. The second reading comes from the people who were in the building and from the accounts that later went through the finances, and it is less quotable. The executive had been planned for the middle of April and slipped, which left the original machine carrying the company for months it was never meant to carry it. Manufacturing and inventory had already run ahead of the money, so every unsold unit in that warehouse was cash the company had spent and not recovered. K-Pro was taking share every single month. The company's accounting was, by the assessment of nearly everyone who looked at it afterwards, not good enough to tell management how much trouble it was in. A new chief executive, Robert Yonich, arrived on a salary of $1 million a year and clashed with the founder almost immediately. And the public share offering that was supposed to refill the accounts was canceled, which is the event that actually removed the money. By the middle of 1983, the company owed $42 million against assets valued at $15. So the honest position is not that the famous explanation is false. It is that it is one strand of four, and the evidence for it carrying the entire collapse on its own is thin. The Osborne Effect is real, and it can hurt a company. This company was already badly hurt before the announcement was public. The end came fast. On the 10th of September 1983, the New York Times reported that the Osborne Computer Corporation was laying off the bulk of its staff. 3 days later, on the 13th, it filed for bankruptcy protection. The factory that had spent 2 years failing to meet its own orders emptied out in waves, and the people who had assembled the computers and packed the diskettes and taped the cartons shut went home. Some found work at other firms around the Bay, others left the industry. Adam Osborne wrote his own account of the collapse afterwards with a co-author, and it points at the manufacturing, the delays, and the competition rather than at anything he said out loud. He was also defending his own reputation, and a founder's version of his own decisions is not an independent verdict. He was not finished, and what happened next is stranger than the bankruptcy. In 1984, he founded a software company called Paperback Software, on exactly the argument he had always made, that the industry overcharged for capability nobody used. Its spreadsheet, VP Planner, did most of what Lotus 123 did, and it sold for a fraction of the price. It sold extremely well. Lotus sued in 1987, claiming that copying the menus and the command structure infringed its copyright, and on the 28th of June 1990, Judge Robert Keaton of the Federal District Court in Massachusetts found for Lotus. The ruling is a landmark in American software law, and it destroyed Paperback Software. Osborne resigned. He started another company in 1992. Then a brain disorder began causing a series of strokes, and he had to stop. In the late 1990s, he went back to India, to the part of the world where he had been raised. And on the 18th of March, 2003, he died in Kodaikanal, in the hills of Tamil Nadu, a long way from Hayward, California. Think about what the whole arc actually demonstrates, because it is not the lesson the industry took from it. Osborne's founding idea was that adequate is enough, and everything above adequate is waste. He was right. And being right built a $100 million company out of nothing in 24 months. Faster than almost anyone in the business had managed. But a product defined as the minimum has nowhere to retreat to. When a competitor arrives offering slightly more for exactly the same money, a company selling the ceiling can cut its price. And a company selling the floor has already spent that move. Kpro did not beat Osborne with a better argument. It beat him with 4 extra inches of glass at an identical price. And there was no answer to that inside the philosophy the company was built on. Could it have survived? Probably, and this is the uncomfortable part. Not by keeping quiet about the executive, which is the answer the famous version implies. By shipping it in April as planned. By keeping accounts good enough to see the cliff coming. And by getting the share offering away before the cash ran out. 3 unglamorous pieces of execution, none of which makes a memorable rule, and any one of them might have bought the year the company needed. The unsold inventory was liquidated, and dealers took the remaining machines for a fraction of the price. They turned up in schools and hobby clubs for years afterwards, and the first portable computer anybody actually bought became a collector's item and a cautionary tale inside the same decade. And they kept working, which is the detail that stays with me. The case is over-engineered, the drives are mechanical and repairable, and there are people running these machines today, more than 40 years on, from the original diskettes. The company lasted under 2 years. The machine is still booting. If you ever carried one of these, drop a comment below. Tell us what it was, what it weighed, and how far you carried it. If you ran a business on 2 floppy drives and a 5-inch screen, tell us what the business was and whether the accounts survived. And if you learned the word star diamond, tell us whether your fingers still remember it. The people who ran those offices and the engineers who built those machines know more about what was lost than the executives who wound the company up. Subscribe because this archive is still growing, and we have the story of another American technology empire coming next. You will not want to miss